All right, AP World, this is going to be a really fast run through the end of these notes for Unit 6. Going to start us on Section 6 and work it here through to the end. Um, Besides the movement of a whole lot of merchandise in the form of raw materials and natural resources during the era of imperialism, we're also going to see a lot of human migration that is going on. And unlike what we've talked about earlier in prior units, as far as transatlantic slave trade, that sort of thing, a lot of this migration, it is going to be labor based. Some of it is going to be in near slavery like conditions, but a lot of it is also going to be in many cases voluntary. It's going to run a whole wide gamut, and so I'm going to be taking you through a little bit of this. Actually, the next two sections are going to are going to do with this migration topic. Okay, we're going to see a number of different kinds of labor systems come into play. A lot of these are going to be very much influenced by the fact that with the Industrial Revolution we have all these improved transportation technologies, steamships, things like that, and so that's going to be helping for a lot of this to come about as we see a lot of the countries that have a lot of colonies spread around the world now using the labor force coming out of those colonies, again, native and indigenous people, and putting them to work, okay? Sometimes in their own colonies, but other times pulling them out of one colony and sending them to other colonies where more labor is needed. If we look at India as an example, there are going to be Indians who are either going to be offered pay and some benefits, in some cases kind of almost more along the lines of coerced, into leaving India and going to other parts of the British Empire to get work done. And so some of the Britain's holdings in the Caribbean, the Fiji Islands in the Pacific, and South Africa. I'd already mentioned about Mahatma Gandhi, working to help administer the colony down there. So some of those Indian laborers are going to do physical labor, infrastructure, building railroads, things like that, and some of them are going to be put to work helping to run the colony itself. Those who are educated, all right. So you got that example. Chinese laborers. What we're going to see in this case, a lot of times, is going to be more of a voluntary migration, and Chinese who are looking at a country that because of all of the foreign interference and basically just everything coming out of those opium wars and just by that point in time, going into just decades of this issues with foreign countries involving themselves in the internal affairs of China, you're gonna have a lot of Chinese who are looking at getting out of the country for opportunity, finding that poverty is becoming more and more of an issue, and so some of them ending up in Malaya, which is a British colony. Some of them come right here to the United States. Some of you with some American history background, middle school, might remember during the California Gold Rush, a lot of Chinese come over here to mine and kind of join in that search for gold, looking for opportunity. You're also going to have a lot of Chinese who will end up working building railroads here in the United States. They'll take on jobs working for the Union Pacific, the Western Pacific, is the Transcontinental Railroad is being built and all that kind of thing. So again, that one's a little bit more voluntary. They're looking for opportunity. Okay, you'll see some of the same with Japanese as well, where they will find themselves moving for and looking for opportunities and ending up some of the places you have listed there. And some of those places, that influence that the Japanese have still exists to this very day. You still see that Japanese influence in Peru. Anyone who's spent time in Hawaii knows that there's still a very strong Japanese influence there as well. So not only does this, these migrations have the impact during the era of imperialism, but in a lot of times, in a lot of cases, creates basically patterns that exist to this very day. Okay, different kind of labor systems, and this is when we talk about the Indians and some of the others, we're going to get into the mix here. Different ways that they're going to be being utilized. Now, I wouldn't really say one, two, or three up there is going to fall within the realm of slavery. I would say maybe some of those Indian laborers, the physical laborers who are coerced into going in and working in some of Britain's other colonies, are probably living in conditions and working conditions that are near slavery, but they are still being paid when you get right down to it. Again, during most of this era of imperialism, slavery in and of itself is illegal. And as we've been talking about in class already, it's going on. And during a chunk of this era of imperialism, I mean, the United States will still be hanging on to slavery, and using it especially down in the southern states until our Civil War changes all of that. But you'll see some uses of it still going on down in the Caribbean, down in Brazil, in some parts of Africa. It's still lingering on. So supposedly finished, but in reality, truly not. All right. We learned a unit or so ago about indentured servitude. This is going to be another labor system that's going to be operated. Again, it's operated here in the 13 colonies when that is still part of the British Empire. It will be operated and utilized in other parts of different empires and different colonial holdings. And it's that same idea. You're going to work for a set amount of time, and then when you are finished with that time, you're going to have your freedom and sometimes, usually, some other little perks, maybe a little bit of land given to you, that kind of thing. And that is used as another way of providing labor in some of these colonies. Contract laborers, it sounds innocuous, like, okay, you sign a contract to go do some work. But this is oftentimes going to end up really resulting in some really close to slavery kind of work conditions. And we'll see this used in some different parts of Asia and other parts of the world. And a lot of times what it is, it's going to be people who are kind of either tricked or coerced. And these are typically going to be, indigenous people out of the colonial holdings, and then put to work and put to work in within the colony or in other places in again these near slavery kind of conditions. This will be a system that will be eventually shut down near the end of the 19th century. There'll be some media publicity that pretty much kind of rips the cover off and reveals that this form of slavery is still existing, and so contract laboring will go away. Another one we've also talked about was through the establishment of penal colonies. So whether we're talking about the British here in North America with their Georgia colony, whether it's Australia, okay, these are created as these places to send laborers to go work on these projects, and a lot of these are people who have been in prisons back in their home countries and are being given this as kind of another option that they can do to go work off their time and then have the opportunity of starting a new life in a colony. All right. The French also jump in on this, and probably one of their in French Guiana. They operate Devil's Island, a very, very kind of an infamous penal colony where a lot of French convicts are sent to kind of do a lot of that kind of work. Okay. Some of the challenges connect, and again, kind of gets into some of the motivations why this is going on, and we'll see this theme of poverty. When we talk about India and China, there are going to be a lot of Indians who are going to voluntarily, agree to go work in one of Britain's other colonies because they see it as an avenue of getting themselves out of poverty. The Indians or the British make no bones about the fact that, as they operate their colony in India, again, it's all about the extracting all the value and sending that back to England. The people of India themselves, the native population, it is a struggle. And so for many of them, this is opportunity to possibly try to create a better standard of living for themselves. Same with China, as we already talked about. Okay, another place that we see a lot of migration is going to go on to escape poverty. Okay, we can throw Ireland and Italy into the mix as well. With Ireland, they're going to end up experiencing the potato famine, the potato blight in the 1840s. those potatoes that make it over to from the Columbian Exchange by the early 19th century are basic staple food of Ireland. And then this disease comes in and begins to wipe out the potato crop, and people are starving to death. And so those Irish who can afford to get out of the country, they do. A lot of them migrate here to the United States. They migrate to other places as well, but you have that sort of thing. You have Italy and parts of Italy that are struggling with severe poverty, and have Italians. Some of them heading down to South America. Many of them ending up in areas like in Argentina. Others ending up here in North America. So again, a lot of times it's going to be poverty driven. Sometimes you're going to have a little political motivation as well as people who are seeking to go somewhere where maybe they can feel a little bit more freedom. The Irish definitely had some of that at play as well, because that is at a time when Ireland is being treated almost like a colony of Britain at that point, still under British control. Okay. Let's see, the concept of settler colonies. Let me get into here. This is pretty much the idea of, when we talk about colonialism, we focus on that idea of settlers, people who come from another land, from the kind of like the home country, and instead of just coming to profit and then go back home, these are the ones who plan on staying. Okay, and a lot of these countries involved in imperialism, including the United States, we're going to kind of throw us in the mix. This is kind of like a plan of using settlers to, like it says here, to basically replace an indigenous population, and to kind of create an extension of the homeland in doing so, and giving a place, especially for some of these home countries that are having issues with, population and things like that. This is a way of taking the pressure off, is creating incentives, come to this new land, come to these colonies, you can settle here, you can have all these opportunity, cheap land, and you can get all of these things that are going to be benefits to you that you couldn't have had back home. Okay. And that is going to be a strong attraction for a lot of people. Oh my goodness, my pictures. Oh well, we'll populate. Okay, and so a lot of those people who take up that offer to go and settle. I'm not going to say all of these categories are going to be maybe permanent, but most of them are going to have people who are going to be in these colonies and these new lands long term. And so some examples of the roles that these settlers would have. Kind of like the picture you see over there on the left side. Many of them will arrive as soldiers. That's including here in the United States. When we talk about that westward push, and to fill the West with settlers at the expense of Native American tribes. Yeah, a lot of them are going to be U.S. Army troops that come out here to to kind of keep the peace, and to make sure that Native Americans stay on their reservations and things like that. Many of those soldiers will then stay out west after their enlistments, and you're going to see that in a lot of other parts of the world as well. Okay, a lot of whether we're talking about the British, we're talking about the French, we're talking about the Germans, and a lot of those soldiers will do their time and go back home. But some of them will kind of find a little bit of a connection with that colony that they've been serving in, and decide to stay after their enlistment, after their term of service is over, and start life there. So they kind of start in a temporary status and end up going permanent. You have government officials who administer these colonies, and and they're making sure that these newfound lands and newly settled lands are some law and order and all that kind of thing. And so you have them. And it's kind of the same thing. Many of them show up thinking it's going to be temporary, and some of them it's long term, and some of them decide to become permanent settlers themselves, even after maybe they are no longer even employed in that job. Okay, many of them also coming to profit, and doing so by taking on kind of these company jobs. Whether it is working as overseers and managers of some of the the agricultural farms, plantations, whether we're talking about cotton or we're talking about the fruit industry, whatever it may be, and the same thing, for some of these it might feel a little bit more temporary, and others it's going to take them further on down the road where they may end up in more of a permanent status. And then the last area we'll focus on here is what I call technical experts. A lot of these are people who are going to be especially focused in on building infrastructure. Okay, civil engineers, things like that. People who are designing bridges, people who are surveying and laying out roadways, railways, all that sort of thing. And there's going to be a ton of those people who are employed and move into all these new lands, whether it's again the Western United States or out in the Pacific or out in the colonies, and and there's territories that are being claimed. All of that. Okay, so there you go. Some ideas of some of the different ways, again, roles that people play. All right. Effects of migration, section 7 here. So we're going to see this massive shifting in demographics because of all these migrations. Those of you AP Hug veterans out there, you remember that, there's kind of these rules about migration. Most migrants are male, and this is definitely the case during this point in time. And so, a lot of the guys people who are heading, whether, again, voluntarily, those Indians that are going to South Africa, going to, the Fiji Islands, many of the bulk of them are men who are going to go do that voluntarily, or whether they are coerced into that. The idea being most of them are going to be going to do physical labor, and I call it traditional or old fashioned or patriarchal or stereotypical, but that's what they're doing. Right. And so, what that's forcing is the countries that they're leaving is this shifting where suddenly you're going to get some gender imbalance in a lot of cases, where women are left to, take care of families and take on a lot of those roles that had prior had been the roles that men did. So, you have that kind of stuff going on, and that creates these unintended, in many cases, demographic changes. And, just the overall population and gender mix that you see in some of these countries begins to shift and change because of all of this. All right. I guess that's kind of a connection in there with what I'm talking about with number 1. And in a lot of the areas where those men are leaving, what it's going to do, it's going to open up a lot of opportunity for women. And in this way, kind of, again, totally by accident, you're going to see some of the impacts of imperialism that are going to, in a way, end up empowering women and moving along, in a way, the women's rights movement. Because in a lot of these areas that will be impacted, the women are now doing the quote unquote the heavy lifting, and that's going to have kind of its own, wave of effects as a result of that. Okay. Migrants and cultural change. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of a blending of cultures and that sort of thing. And in some cases, almost kind of like creating a new kind of a hybrid culture as these migrants arrive and blend in and kind of, intermingle with indigenous people or other cultures who are also arriving, people from other lands to seek out opportunity. You just look even in the Western United States. Oh my goodness, you've got Chinese, you've got Germans, you've got Irish, you've got people who are, quote unquote, native born, Caucasian white Americans who are in the mix as well. It creates its own culture. And so kind of that whole melting pot kind of concept going on in a lot of different parts of the world. Okay. Let's see, where else do we go from there? So the effects on the receiving society. So, what's going on in the lands that all these people are flocking to. First of all, we're going to see the creation of a lot of what we call ethnic enclaves. AP Huggers, you remember this terminology. Those of you who didn't have the AP Hug, this is when people of a specific ethnicity, kind of out of comfort, kind of out of self-protection, when they arrive in a new land, they kind of stick together. Okay. And we talked about some of these enclaves even back during the era of all that, all those trade networks. And that, you'd get, whether it was the Muslim trade, traders and merchants, and they would kind of band together and kind of stick together, in some of the new countries that they're arriving in, whether it's out there in Indonesia, wherever it may be. And you're going to see the same thing going on during this time frame, is that these enclaves will be formed up. A lot of times kind of forming up in some of the other towns and the cities. And a lot of it is going to be based on, national identity, national culture, that sort of thing. And so, like where the Indians end up going. I mean, well, matter of fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. Here we go. The Chinese, they create enclaves here in the Americas, in California. You can still go visit. I mean, I don't think that they refer to it anymore, but back in the day, I mean, well, no, maybe they still do. I mean, the part of San Francisco that has the China, they call it Chinatown District. I mean, there's one down here in Portland. And so, that's where most of the Chinese people congregated together. And again, part of it was that comfort of people from home and you're all kind of living together. If you were facing discrimination, like the Chinese were, who came to California, it was self-protection. There was that aspect of it as well. All right. You also have Indians creating their own enclaves, whether it be in Africa, where Gandhi was doing his work within the British colony, parts of Southeast Asia. So we see that it's kind of like a movement of its own that goes on. All right, yeah, and Irish we can keep on going. Matter of fact, we end up especially in towns like Boston. Huge Irish enclaves there. There'll be Italian enclaves in Boston as well, in New York, and then mentions Argentina down there. Okay, so again, some people argue the whole concept of these enclaves, it's kind of human nature, but it allows a way for people to arrive in a new land and to kind of ease themselves into assimilating in with the rest of the population. All right. But that doesn't mean that, they show up and things are just rosy. Like I already mentioned with the Chinese, face a lot of discrimination and a lot of it when they are showing up here in the United States and in California, which is pretty much where that little poster you see there, dealing with just that basic racial discrimination and prejudice that comes from others that are threatened by their arrival. And so we'll oftentimes see, as almost a natural consequence of a lot of this migration, and especially the creation of these enclaves, people who are planning on staying for a while, is kind of a backlash, what we call nativist movement. And that is where the people who were there first, so to speak, push back on the new, and a lot of times this is they see economic threat, they're going to come and take our jobs, and things like that. Some of it is, they're going to change our culture, those kinds of fears. And so oftentimes you're going to see some of these backlash movements when you have this migration that's going on. An easy example to fall back on, one that will show up again for those of you that take APUSH, is the Chinese Exclusion Act. It's pretty much the only time in American history where we passed literally a federal law, okay, just not for California, but for the entire country, and told China, no one else from your country can immigrate here anymore. And it's going to be in place for, I'd have to double check, but it's in place for about the next 40-ish years. So you're going to see that. You're going to see the same kind of thing happen in Australia, where they're going to have kind of this, by turn of the century, I think they call it the White Australia policy. And that kind of stays in effect. I mean, all the way into, technically, it's kind of ignored by them, but technically it's still on the law books until the 1970s. So you see a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and we could talk about that. It's just examples of these nativist movements and how they play out in reality. Okay. All right, let's see. And then that takes us to section 8 here, which is awesome because I've got about 6 minutes to try to get this finished up. And section 8 is just kind of a little wrap up here, all right? So big picture, the consequences of imperialism. And so let's take a look at what we've got here. Well, depending on where you live, you're going to see your standard of living go up or go down. And I don't think it would take a whole lot of imagination or thinking on your part to figure this out. The countries that are doing the imperializing, all right, so the British, the French, the Germans, the Belgians, all these countries that are playing an active role. The United States, okay, that's going out and creating its territories and its own little, mini empire kind of a thing. They are seeing their standards of living increase dramatically during the stretch of time. I mean, yes, they're enjoying the benefits of what the Industrial Revolution is bringing to them, and so this increased automation, mechanization of everything you can think of. But they're paying lower prices because they're getting raw materials brought in from colonies and territories, and that's allowing them to see prices go down. They see their wages go up. I mean, everything kind of coming up roses for them, right? The colonies and the territories that they control, yeah, that's where things are going in the opposite direction. That's where you are seeing, prices going up, inflation. You're seeing controlled prices that, and controlled wages that are keeping the indigenous and native people in those countries, at the poverty line and oftentimes below the poverty line. Those kinds of things going on. All right. So it's a mixed bag, but it's pretty easy in terms of trying to remember where it's going up and where it's going down. And it really comes down to, are you a free and independent country that has a bunch of colonies? Because if that's the case, things are looking good. Are you a colony or a territory that is controlled by an outside power? Then you are probably watching the standard of living taking a steep dive. Okay. International trade and economic competition. Yes, this is going to be, and this is going to get us into kind of the setup for World War One, where we see this concept of competition becoming more and more of a real thing. Countries that are looking at each other less and less as cooperating partners in a world order, and more as it's us or them. Whether it's that competition for colonies, whether it's that competition for how much your factories are being able to produce and sell out there on the open marketplace. And so, we're just starting to see with this overseas, with this expansion to all these colonial holdings overseas, and this rising consumerism, and it's all kind of coming together, and resulting in just this huge international trade that's going on, and the level of competition that is all attached to it. Okay, really is going to set things up for where we're going. There's going to be boiling right under the surface of all of this. We talk about these indigenous responses to imperialism. So, these revolts and uprisings, and we talk about, most of the time, sad news, most of them don't succeed, but it doesn't mean they don't go away. And under the surface, we talked about, the Indian National Congress, there are likewise, there are similar organizations operating in many, many other colonies. And the people who are under the control of these outsiders, whether they be Europeans, whether they be Americans, whether they be Japanese, whoever is being controlled is trying to desperately figure out a way of fixing that situation. Okay, trying to figure out a way to organize resistance, figure out ways of trying to reassert their independence and regain control over their own countries that they've lost control of. And so, that is something that is going on. It's kind of a slow boil, slow burn kind of in the background. It's kind of like these seeds of revolt and rebellion are being planted and being slowly kind of watered and nurtured. It's going to take a while for them to go full bloom, but it's always in the background. Okay. And while it's maybe not every single colony that's out there, a lot of them have these nationalist movements that are slowly picking up steam as we go into the late 19th century and turning into the early 20th century. Okay. Picking up on that last big topic we covered, migration, we are seeing this continued pace of things moving into a really just a reversal of the way that the world has operated for centuries, and this drive towards more and more urbanization. Okay. where more and more people are giving up that, that rural farm life, that dependence on agriculture, and moving to the cities, looking for opportunity, factory jobs, all of that kind of thing. Okay, and that's just going to even, open up even more opportunity. But another example of change. Sorry, you can probably hear there's a slight dog back. They're revolting. Again, I was talking about nationalist movements, and now the dogs are going. Maybe you can hear them barking in the background. I'm going to keep going because I got it. All right. And then where I'll finish it off is kind of looping back up to what I mentioned there with B. Okay. Whether it be this competition for, the sale of manufactured goods, whether it be the competition in the size of empires, and, who's got the most control over land. We're going to see this slow disintegration of cooperation amongst these big European powerful countries, the Germans, the British, the French. They again, they are looking at each other primarily as competitors, as rivals, and that idea of working together is something that just fades further and further and further into the background. And, this is what comes of empire building. This just comes out of, economic imperialism is just these layers and layers of competition and rivalry. And that is what is going to really get us set up for the explosion that's going to occur early on in the 20th century with the First World War. Okay, I'm about a minute over, but sue me. All right, it's about all I got you on that. Anyhow, that wraps us up on a unit, folks. We got her done, and yeah, there we go. Till next time.